Alright, hey everybody, this is Andrew Lennon, and we're going to talk about who created God. Okay, so thing we know for certain is one of the tenets of religion is that there is a creator because everything that's organized has to have a creator. Okay, the laws of thermodynamics say that all things tend toward entropy, which means a less organized state. All forms of energy will eventually, what we call it the heat death of the universe, because all kinds of energy will eventually become heat, which eventually dissipates. Now, it's a really interesting thing about the dissipation of energy, because we know that matter and energy cannot be destroyed. Isn't that interesting? Matter and energy cannot be destroyed. So, what is the reduction of energy is that matter and energy, according to the laws of thermodynamics, move to a state that is less organized. It has less usefulness in engines, so forth. One of the characteristics of a good engine is that it takes high amount of energy in one place or one form, and it uses that to produce some kind of a work, which would be some kind of a constructive or creative work. And then after it's used, it's in a less useful state. So it goes from one reservoir to another reservoir. And maybe like you might think of it like water behind a bridge. It goes from the reservoir behind the bridge, then proceeding down to lower states into the ocean. Now, obviously, there are processes where water evaporates and goes back up to those higher states as it rains back down on the mountains and so forth. But from physics, we learn that even though there are processes that can move energy to higher states, in the end, all energy moves towards a lower state, or that eventually that process will stop. So physics is very clear on that. Creation requires a creator, but who created God? All right, so we know that God is omniscient, omnipotent, is all-powerful. Now, obviously, we call God all-powerful as far as infinite power, infinite knowledge, infinite everything. And that's at the very least from our perspective. At least with respect to how they can see it, all-powerful, right? They earn income that's infinitely greater than what a child can earn, when they're, say, 2. So, is similar with God. We look at God and we say, compared to what we can do and what we can understand, it's infinite. Okay, but we know that the universe is finite as far as, especially in a certain region, there's a certain amount of energy and matter that exists in that area. And there are finite resources on this earth. There are finite resources. And every resource that we want, anyways, though it might be here, requires effort. So what's available to us requires energy to get it. It's finite because, at the very least, even with the processes that we have, there's only so much that we can do in a given 24-hour period. Okay. So in this world, God is obviously working with finite resources, but we call him omnipotent because, with respect to at least what we understand, he's not limited. Okay, so at the very least, God requires a creator in some way because such a all-powerful force, can't exist out of nothing, right? I mean, that's one of the fundamental precepts that we've already covered with religion. Things that are good and obviously created and organized, intelligent, cannot just come out of nothing. Okay, so, but we already covered that, as a single-celled person, myself, back when I was conceived, I wasn't the same as I am now. And when God was created, he obviously was not the same as he is now. So, the creator of God would have created something that, though different than he is now, had the potential to become how he is now. And though we are different when we were created than we are now, we also have the potential to become as God. And the reason is, we already covered, we are the children of God, and he cares about us as children. He calls us children because we have the potential to become as he is. Obviously, the potential does not mean we will become as he is, and we know many people born into this world have, we'll say, seriously fallen short of their potential. Okay, so not all people will become what they had the potential to become. All right, so who created God? Obviously, it would have had to have been another God. And so then atheists, as you can see in this particular article, in this particular answer, will push back on that. And wait a minute, if there had to have been a creator of a creator, then wait a minute, who created that creator, right? And is there an infinite chain of creators? And the answer is not necessarily, but there could be, right? I mean, what do we know? We're just children in this vast, infinite universe. We know nothing really. But a creator to create God as he is now would have to be so much more powerful than a creator who created God, let's say, as we were created. I mean, if you think about it, your parents don't have to be a God to create you. And yet, what's your potential, right? All they have to do really is a fairly simple act. And so, what did God's God have to be in order to create God, right? Well, we don't know, but we do know that it didn't necessarily have to be something as great as God is now. Just great enough to raise a God up to become a God, okay? So, and you may be wondering, well, what is a God then? What are we talking about here? And frankly, we don't necessarily have to go into the exact detail about what a God is. All we have to know is that it's something that's a lot more smart and powerful and wise and good than we are. That's absolutely for certain. And unfortunately, that doesn't require a whole lot. We tend to be fairly foolish, fairly unwise. We tend to hurt each other a lot. Wars and we tend to be quite malicious to each other. So, on this earth, mortal humans certainly are quite a fallen species, and there's no doubt on that. So, all right. Who created God? Obviously, another God. Who created him? Obviously, another one. But again, what does it require to create someone that creates a God? Well, what does it require to create someone that created my parents, right? Another set of parents, right? Did they have to be as smart as my parents were? Not necessarily. It could be that they were smart enough to create my parents, so smart enough to raise my parents in order for them to progress, to be as good as they are. And it turns out, and it's probably a similar story with your parents, that my parents had a lot of flaws. There were a lot of things wrong with them, and yet I managed to learn from them and to become better in many ways. It might easily be said that I became better in most ways. That really, my parents don't have to be better than me in order to make me. They just have to be good enough to help me to see how to better myself, to be better than them. And so and in fact, my grandparents had some really serious deficiencies. They were actually worse than my parents were. I'm not going to necessarily go into the details on that, but safe to say you can look at your own parents and grandparents and probably see a similar story. Now, it's not always the case that the children will become better than the parents. There are many cases where children can become quite horrific, and even fall, like we've talked about before, fall short of their potential. Okay. But it is the possibility that children can become better than their parents. And I would think that's the hope of a parent, is that if your children become better than you, then their children will have better parents than you were. And that's a hope, because why should their children have to suffer through the problems that you had, right? I mean, certainly I made mistakes, and my children suffer because of them, right? Things I don't know, things I didn't anticipate, um, things that, I got angry when I shouldn't have, or assumed things that I shouldn't have about them. And so why should, my children have to bring children to the world that suffer those same problems? Hopefully they'll become better. They'll learn from my mistakes. If I'm teaching them well, I'll teach them not only how to see my mistakes and how to recognize it and hopefully forgive, right? I try to make things right with them. I try to get them to forgive my mistakes. But then they're going to, if I taught them right, look for their own mistakes and try to become better and try to seek forgiveness from their children and to repent. Now, I am likening the progression of mortal parents to progression of God's in their creation, but I'm not necessarily trying to imply that, at least now, that God has any imperfections. Okay. Now, it may be that there may be some imperfections that we can't see as humans, that for all intents and purposes, God is perfect. Okay. That even if we did find any imperfections, they would really be largely irrelevant. And of course, we're taught, well, if we're busy looking for the imperfections of others, especially if they're really small imperfections, there's a lot of time and effort that's not devoted to finding our own imperfections. So it's not even a worthwhile cause to look for imperfections in God if they existed and if they mattered, right? We can trust God when He says He is perfect. It may be that when we get to His level, there may be lessons learned that He wants to share with us, right? He says, hey, you know what? There maybe some people on Earth that I thought they had more potential than they did. It was a small difference, gave them a chance, and they blew it. I don't know. But obviously we know one thing: God wants us to return to Him. He wants us to learn, become better. He's commanded us to be perfect, and He's dedicated to that. So whatever techniques and tools that He uses to help us to learn from our mistakes and to become better, obviously as an all-wise God, He will do. And if He doesn't do it, then in His infinite wisdom, far wiser than we are, it's not a tool or a technique that would be especially useful to us. We can doubt and second guess God, but in our foolishness and our lack of omniscience, that would be rather arrogant and probably a bad call. I mean, it would be kind of like a kindergartner questioning a PhD in physics, right? Sure, there may be things that the PhD in physics doesn't understand, but when it comes to what the kindergartner needs to learn, it probably doesn't matter. It's probably irrelevant, and the kindergarten couldn't even understand it. And the kindergarten might see some teaching about relativity that the professor might try to do. Obviously, a wise professor won't teach about relativity until the child's ready. But just as an example, the child may have heard of relativity and grossly misunderstood it because he's not ready for it. He's barely understanding his ABCs. And then he might question the professor and say, how does this doctor in philosophy not understand, something about relativity? It's obviously impossible for matter and energy to change, because they're obviously separate things. That'd be a very smart kindergartner. But the point is that when you doubt something that is far beyond yourself, it's not only foolish and arrogant and ignorant and a waste of time, and it will probably lead you on a bad course to not trusting that that doctor in philosophy, not therefore not learning from him. It's an overall evil path. If you want to learn from a mentor, you trust the mentor. You listen to him. You learn from him. You limit your doubts because, who are you? What do you know? And that would be the thing I would throw at really any atheist is, what do you know? If you want to question God or, say that he's wrong about something or that he's immoral about a certain action, what do you know about what happened back in the time you're questioning? And, where's your omniscience? Why do you think you're better? And they might try to prove a good point, and the worst case would be that they actually convince me, right? Because in my foolishness, my foolish ignorance, there may be tons of things about God I don't know, and so somebody might be able to cover all the bases for my understanding and basically render me unable to see anything more than they see, right? So yeah, the basic principle is, if you want to learn from someone that's wiser than you, trust them. I wouldn't say a blind trust, because obviously you want to learn, you want to understand why, but you're not saying why like, prove yourself to me, explain yourself to me. It's why more like, why, like, please explain this to me, please help me to understand, help me to see if possible. Obviously a God created God, but not necessarily in the form that we think of him now, and we can't really even think of him because he's beyond our ability to comprehend, but certainly not the way he is now. All right, thanks for watching.